Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going deep on something that we all interact with every day, markets. I always thought markets were supposed to be this perfect self-regulating machine, like supply and demand just magically work everything out.
Well, it turns out it's a little bit more complicated than that.
Right. I mean, think about it. Have you ever bought something and felt like you got, I don't know, kind of a raw deal?
It happens to all of us. And, those experiences point to something that economists call market weaknesses.
Market weaknesses. So it's not just me being bad at shopping.
Not at all. These weaknesses are like inherent challenges that pop up in any market.
Okay, well, I'm definitely intrigued. And luckily, we have an expert in the field joining us today to help break all of this down.
Yeah.
For this deep dive, we're using an excerpt from a text called Responding to Market Weaknesses.
I think a lot of people hear market weaknesses and think market failures, but they're not quite the same thing. They're more like, well, hiccups in the system.
So not a complete meltdown, but definitely some bumps in the road.
Exactly. You see, for a market to function perfectly, you need a few things. Everyone needs to be making informed decisions. We all need to understand what's available and what people want, and there can't be anything messing with prices.
Okay, that makes sense in theory. But in the real world, things don't always work out so neatly, right?
Exactly. In reality, that perfect scenario almost never happens.
So what are some of these hiccups we should be on the lookout for?
Well, the text outlines 6 common market weaknesses that we all encounter in different ways throughout our lives.
6. Okay, lay them on me.
All right, here we go. Imperfect information, monopoly power, public goods, externalities, economic instability, and economic inequality.
Wow, okay, that is quite the list. I feel like I've definitely experienced the sting of imperfect information a time or two. Like that time I bought a new phone online that was, well, not quite as advertised.
Oh yeah, we've all been there. Imperfect information can lead to all sorts of bad decisions, both big and small. It's not just about consumers getting tricked, though. Businesses can make bad investments or, even hire the wrong people based on incomplete or inaccurate information.
Right. It's like we're all playing this massive economic game, but some players have the cheat codes while others are kind of fumbling around in the dark. So how do we level the playing field?
That's a great question, and one way is through government regulation.
So the government steps in to make sure everyone has access to crucial information.
Exactly. Think about food labeling, safety warnings on products, things like that. Regulations try to make sure that everyone has the information they need before they buy something or take a risk.
So it's all about transparency, making sure everyone knows the rules of the game.
That's the goal. Of course, there's always that tension between letting markets run freely and stepping in to try and fix things.
Right, because too much intervention could stifle innovation, but too little could lead to chaos, right?
It's all about finding that balance, and that can be tough.
A delicate balancing act indeed. It seems like that's going to be a theme as we keep exploring these weaknesses.
Most likely.
Okay, well, let's move on to another big one. Monopolies. Most people have a pretty strong intuition that monopolies are bad, but why exactly are they so problematic?
Well, I'm sure you've heard the phrase, too big to fail. That's what often happens with monopolies. They reach a point where they have so much power that they can dictate terms to consumers and even influence government policy.
Yeah, it's like that classic image of those old-timey robber barons controlling entire industries and crushing anyone who gets in their way. And it's not just a historical thing, right? We see it happening today with some tech giants and pharmaceutical companies.
Absolutely. Monopolies can lead to artificially high prices, fewer choices, and less innovation, which ultimately hurts consumers. The text actually uses a really interesting example from the 1970s. OPEC.
OPEC, the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. That's a pretty big one.
Right. They controlled a huge chunk of the world's oil supply and were able to essentially drive up prices, which caused all sorts of problems globally.
So that's a pretty stark example of how monopolies can affect not just individuals, but entire economies. So how do monopolies even happen in the first place?
Well, sometimes it's a natural outcome of market competition. Maybe one company just happens to be really efficient and outcompetes everyone else.
So it's not necessarily some evil mastermind plotting to take over the world.
Not always. It can also happen through mergers and acquisitions, where companies combine forces to become even bigger and more powerful.
So even if it happens naturally, that doesn't mean it's a good thing, right?
Well, that's where the debate about regulation comes in. Some people argue that monopolies will eventually be challenged by new competitors. Some new technology will come along and disrupt things.
Right, so we just need to let the market work its magic.
Others argue that government intervention is crucial, either to break up existing monopolies or prevent them from getting too powerful in the first place.
So another one of those balancing acts.
Seems like it.
Lots to think about, for sure. But before we get too deep into that, let's move on to some of the other market weaknesses that we need to be aware of. Okay, so we've covered imperfect information and those super-powered monopolies. What's next on our market weakness tour?
Well, let's shift gears a bit and talk about something called public goods.
Public goods. That sounds pretty positive, like parks and libraries, maybe free puppies for everyone.
Well, free puppies might be pushing it. But you're on the right track. Public goods are things that benefit everyone in society.
I think I'm following. But why are public goods considered a market weakness? Shouldn't the market, just naturally provide these essential things?
There's a catch. It's something called the free rider problem.
Free riders. Sounds like people sneaking onto the bus without paying.
That's a great analogy. Because public goods benefit everyone, individuals have an incentive to let others pay. Why pay for something if you can get it for free? But if everyone thinks that way, no one ends up paying. And the public good either never gets provided or it's seriously underfunded.
Ah, I see. It's like those group projects where one person does all the work and everyone else just coasts along.
Exactly. The text actually uses the example of a lighthouse. Everyone benefits from its warning signal, but who wants to pay for its upkeep?
Right. It's in every ship captain's interest to have a working lighthouse, but no single captain wants to bear the full cost. So how do we actually get lighthouses or clean air or any of these crucial things if the market struggles to provide them?
Well, this is where governments often step in. You see, they can use tax revenue to, fund those public goods.
So it's not just about funding roads and schools. It's also about making sure those essential but easily overlooked things get taken care of.
That's right. And that actually brings us to another interesting concept, externalities.
Externalities. Okay, now we're getting into some serious econ jargon.
It's not as complicated as it sounds. Think of it like this. Have you ever been trying to enjoy a quiet afternoon at home and your neighbor decides to fire up their leaf blower?
Oh, I've been there. Nothing ruins a relaxing Sunday like the roar of a two-stroke engine.
Well, that's a perfect example of a negative externality. It's a cost imposed on someone who wasn't involved in the original decision. In this case, your neighbor probably isn't trying to ruin your day.
Right, but their actions have a ripple effect.
Exactly. And just as there are negative externalities, there are positive ones too. Think about, let's say, getting vaccinated. Not only does it protect you, but it also helps to prevent the spread of disease, benefiting everyone around you.
So externalities are kind of like these hidden costs and benefits that the market doesn't always account for.
Right. And they can definitely mess things up. Negative externalities can lead to overproduction. Take pollution, for example. A company might pollute to save money, but the cleanup costs are often borne by society.
And on the other hand, things with positive externalities, like education or research, might be underproduced because the market doesn't fully capture those wider benefits.
Exactly. And that's often where governments try to intervene, either to discourage those negative externalities or encourage those positive ones.
So we're back to that balancing act again. Trying to find the sweet spot between market forces and government intervention, it's a lot to consider. But we're not done yet, are we? There are still more market weaknesses to uncover.
You bet. And the next one is something that, we all experience in one way or another, the ups and downs of the economic roller coaster.
Ah, yes. The dreaded E word. Economic instability. Recessions, booms, busts, it can feel pretty unpredictable. And looking back at history, it seems like these economic swings are just part of the deal when it comes to markets. Why is that? So we've established that economic instability, those ups and downs, are kind of a built-in feature of market economies. But why do these booms and busts happen in the first place? Is it just random, or are there some patterns we can, look out for?
Well, it's not totally random, although it can definitely feel that way sometimes. The text actually mentions a few things that contribute to this instability, and one of them is something called the stickiness of wages and prices.
Sticky wages. Sounds kind of gross, like something you'd find on the bottom of your shoe.
Yeah, not quite as messy as that, but it can definitely cause some problems. What it means is that wages and prices don't always react quickly to changes in the economy.
Okay, I think I see what you mean. So, say there's a sudden drop in demand for something. Let's say those self-stirring coffee mugs that everyone was so excited about for like a week.
Perfect example. Now, in a perfectly flexible market, the price of those mugs would plummet to reflect the lower demand. And the factory making them would immediately cut back production, maybe even lower wages.
But in the real world, things just don't move that fast, right?
Exactly. Companies might be hesitant to lower wages because, well, it can hurt employee morale or make it harder to hire people in the future. And sometimes it takes a while to adjust production to make something else. So you end up with a situation where prices are too high, production is too high, and people start losing their jobs.
Ah, I see. It's like this downward spiral that's hard to pull out of. And we're not just talking coffee mugs here, right? This can happen on a much larger scale.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Think industries, even whole national economies.
Mm-hmm.
The textbook actually includes a graph of historical unemployment rates, and it's kind of scary to see those spikes during recessions. Those spikes represent real people losing their jobs, businesses shutting down. It can get pretty bad.
It definitely puts things into perspective. These abstract economic theories have real-world consequences. So what can we do? Is there anything that can be done to kind of soften those blows? Can governments do anything to stabilize things, to maybe prevent those deep recessions?
Well, that's a question economists have been grappling with for ages. The text mentions fiscal policy and monetary policy as the two main tools that governments can use.
Okay, time for a quick refresher. Fiscal policy is about government spending and taxes, right? And monetary policy has to do with interest rates and controlling the money supply.
Exactly. These are powerful but complicated tools, and there's a lot of debate about how and when to use them. But the basic idea is that governments can try to stimulate the economy when things slow down.
So it's like, giving the economy a bit of a jump start when the engine is sputtering.
That's a good way to put it. They can do things like increase spending or cut taxes to try and boost demand.
And on the monetary policy side, I guess they can lower interest rates to make it cheaper for businesses to borrow money and hopefully invest more.
Right. But, of course, it's not always that simple. There's always a risk that these interventions could backfire or that the government might wait too long to act.
So it's like walking a tightrope.
Pretty much. But even when governments get things right, there's probably always going to be some level of instability. You can't control everything, right?
You can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Exactly. But even if we accept that there will always be some ups and downs, there's another market weakness that raises some big questions about fairness and equity.
You're talking about economic inequality, that gap between the haves and the have-nots. It seems like that's becoming a more and more pressing issue. But is it just an inevitable outcome of a market system, or is there something we can do about it?
That's a tough one. The text points out that market forces, while really good at driving innovation, can also lead to a concentration of wealth at the top.
So the rich get richer, as the saying goes.
Basically, it's a complex problem with no easy answers. The text mentioned a few approaches, like promoting equal opportunity through education and job training.
So investing in people, so they have a fair shot from the start.
Right. There are also ideas around redistributing wealth through things like progressive taxation or social safety net programs.
It seems like a lot of these discussions come back to those fundamental questions we were talking about earlier. How much should we rely on the free market to solve these problems, and when should governments step in? Is there like a perfect balance?
It's an ongoing debate. There's no perfect formula, and the best approach might depend on a lot of different factors.
Well, this deep dive has definitely highlighted just how complex these issues are. There are no easy answers, but understanding these market weaknesses is crucial for anyone who wants to understand how the world works.
I couldn't agree more, and I think it's important to remember that despite these weaknesses, markets can be incredibly powerful tools. The challenge is harnessing that power for good while also making sure the benefits are shared fairly.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So, to wrap things up, we've explored how imperfect information, monopolies, public goods, externalities, economic instability, and inequality can all create challenges within a market economy. And we've touched on some of the ways governments and societies try to address these issues through things like regulation, intervention, and social programs. A huge thanks to our expert for guiding us through this complex and fascinating landscape. And to you, dear listener, for joining us on this deep dive. If you're interested in learning more, be sure to check out the source material, Responding to Market Weaknesses. It's a great starting point for further exploration. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.